Hello everyone and welcome back to what will be, if I've done my maths right, the final episode of Creating Conversation for 2025. Joining me is Dave King. This is the second part of the Malta Comic Con series, which we kind of began with John last week's episode. I've been saying in a couple of episodes I'll do a podcast from Malta Comic Con where I was a guest this past November, but acoustically we just didn't have the chance. So John and now Dave King have joined me for today's episode. Dave is a great conversation. He has such a variety and, exciting stories to share about the development of his career, from being a cartoonist for a paper to working on music videos. It's really great fun, and he's very enthusiastic. So I think you're really going to enjoy today's episode with Dave King and Creating Conversation. So, Dave King, thank you for joining us here today. Welcome to Creating Conversation. How are you keeping?
A pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to be here in Norway. You're in Ireland, so it's a pleasure to be here digitally, at least.
It's hilarious. I was joking about how I was going to try and do all these recordings at Malta Comic Con, where we were both recently guests, and then we were just saying before the recording that the audio conditions weren't conducive. So I've been
inside the convention it was full of, like, I don't know what it was, 10,000 people or something, milling around and shouting and screaming and music blaring, and then outside in the bay in Malta it was full of building works going on. So this is definitely the safer way to record the podcast.
I was spoiled because back home when I did a Dublin show, we have a separate room. So in my mind, it's been a while since I've done like a table. I only usually table at Malta. So then I was like, oh yeah, it's ambient noise. There are people, there are crowds. But here's a funny story just to begin with, Dave. So when I came back from Malta, I went to there's a news agents nearby called AJ's News Agents. And the lady who works there, Lisa, was saying that one of the guys, Joe, had found some comics in his house when he first moved in 30 years ago. And I'm just going to share screen here, and hopefully you might be able to see that coming up onto your screen.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so what I put up here is there were Looney Tunes comics, and I was like, no way, because we were just speaking, you were saying like you had done Looney Tunes comics, and I was like, no way, that's Dave's comics. And then I open up, and it goes right at Dave King. I'm like, good Lord, what an incredibly small box. I said to the lady, I literally was in Malta this weekend with this guy who lives in Norway, who wrote these comics. I was like,
whether that's serendipity, destiny, fate, or what, but it's very strange. I can't remember. This is an audio cast, isn't it?
It is indeed an audio one. What I'm actually going to do is, for the thumbnail, I'm going to put the comics into the background.
For the sake of the poor listeners, we're looking at some Looney Tunes comics that were published by Warner Brothers and DC Comics that I used to write for back in the 1990s.
It's incredible. So this gives me more reason then to turn around and ask you, Dave, for the origin story then, because like I got to get to the bottom of this now. Like how you get into this? Because like you've had such a variety of careers, as well as comics, there's animation, there's teaching, there's music videos. So now there's a horror film as well. You're currently in production. So like there's a lot that's happening. So let's scale it back to, as they say, the beginning, a very good place to begin for yourself.
How it all began. I was bitten by a radioactive cartoonist. I guess it was, I mean, going back to destiny or fate or whatever, I mean, I was quite lucky. I grew up in a household in London where this kind of stuff was always around. Comic books, film, horror, genre magazines were always around the house. You know, my Bibles growing up were famous monsters of Filmland and Marvel comics. I'm a big Marvel head, and Though actually, I think some of the earliest comics, American comics, I can remember being around the house, are probably Superman, and I think I still have them somewhere. As I do with I have a huge run of Famous Monsters of Filmland, which for anybody, for you youngsters out there who don't know, Famous Monsters of Filmland was the genre magazine created by publisher Jim Warren and editor Forrest J. Ackerman, or Uncle Forry, as he was known to readers, and it was full on horror and science fiction movies in a monthly magazine with a lot of humor involved, a lot of terrible puns. In a period, I mean, we're talking about I was born in the early to mid '60s and 1960s, and there was no internet, there was nothing to sort of to keep us young genre fans abreast of what was happening. So things like Famous Monsters were a lifeline to sort of genre fans such as myself. So I was lucky. I grew up in a house full of sort of comic books and magazines, and my parents were great. They really encouraged me. I got my I was a cartoonist for many years, and I got my drawing skills from my mum, passed down along the DNA, and so they were very encouraging of me. Some of my earliest drawings I remember doing were copying verbatim issues of the Amazing Spider-Man. While I was in primary school, I think I was doing this. So I'm
And
sure.
who would have been the artist for you then? Would that have been John Romita Sr.?
John Romita Sr., absolutely. I mean, if you want to talk about mentors, Romita Sr. Was the guy for me. I mean, even more, I mean, I love Kirby and Ditko, but Romita Sr. for me was the man, and I loved and still love his art style, and think he is a genuine master of storytelling. When he took over the Amazing Spider-Man in I've got to put my comic geek head back on, issue 30 or something, 31 or something like that. I don't know.
It would have been 39 because that's the iconic
39.
Green Goblin with.
Yes.
Ironically, I'm cheating because the issue's hanging on the wall right beside me.
Good man. Thank you for the memory prompt there. Yeah, and I should know because I have that issue, the two issues he took over, 39 and 40. But that run that he did through till, I guess it was 100 and something, sort of 128, 29, something like that, when Ross Andru took over. Those for me are some of the purest form of and greatest comic books ever created. The storytelling with Stan Lee is magnificent. It perfectly mixes soap opera and superheroics, and Peter Parker was such a relatable character, and still, I can kind of see those early years. I sort of see how it's sort of, oh yeah, I want to be a freelancer at something. He was a freelance photographer. I became a freelance cartoonist for many years. So that's kind of my origins, drawing my own comics in school. I was lucky again. I had some very encouraging teachers in primary and junior school who always encouraged me to draw. I don't have any stories about anybody sort of, trying to set me back and saying, oh, I have one, which was a jobs career officer when I was at grammar school, who suggested I should go into the army.
But it is a dramatic change of
that was really like a left turn. I don't know where. My grammar school was a very old-fashioned grammar school to begin with. It was, when I first started going there, it was a bit like Harry Potter with Hogwarts, with all the teachers in mortarboards and capes, and they still taught Latin and stuff like that. So, but that's literally one guy in my life who in my young life, who ever sort of said, no, you can't make a living at this kind of stuff, you know.
No,
So I
it's
guess that,
oh, go ahead.
yeah, sorry, that's really it. You know, I was very lucky in my childhood with sort of, you know, older people encouraging me all the way. Wasn't till later in my career that people started saying no to me.
Oh yeah, it has to happen eventually.
It does. Oh yeah.
It's curious though with the career counselor saying about joining the army because Will Eisner, Stan Lee, you know, they all had stints, obviously because it was World War II. But what we I gotta respect is with Will Eisner in particular, he was like, well, these young men are lying about their ages going in to the military, so they're not going to read the pamphlets or the instruction manuals. Let's turn them into comic books. You know, he really was. He understood the academic merits. You know, not for the sake of
Absolutely.
academic.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. For sure. But I have no idea why my guys. I mean, this would have been in. There were no major world wars going on at the time. I guess he just looked at me, and thought, "Oh yeah, look, sort of artsy farty, creative type. We'll toughen him up a bit. You know, give him a stint in the army." This was like
And
1979 or something, I guess.
oh wow, yeah. God. Yeah, he's got a yeah, I don't know. I guess he had a quote he had to fill.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Let's tick that box. You know.
You were saying you got your drawing skills from your mother.
Mm.
Was she did she ever pursue it professionally herself, or was it just
No,
something that she did as a passion, a hobby?
not at all. My mum, I come from a very, very working class London background, and I mean really working class, as it was in the sort of, well, for me in the 1960s. My mum, growing up in the sort of late 30s and 1940s, uh, even though she had drawing skills, it was not encouraged by my grandparents in her. And in fact, she was asked to leave school at a very. I think she was asked to leave school at about by her dad at about 14 years old or something, so she could go and work in a shop and earn money for the family. You know, which may, I think, probably played a large part in why my mum was so supportive of my skills, my artistic skills, because she had not been encouraged. So I think, you know, my mum's quite a strong-minded character in her way, and I think that part of her kind of said, okay, well, he's not going to go through what I went through, you know. So I was definitely very lucky that, but she definitely had artistic skills, and even before I was at school, I remember her sitting down and, you know, drawing with me and encouraging me to draw. So you know, I was very, very lucky, as I say, in that aspect.
Oh, brilliant. And how did you make the leap then from being like someone in school, making their own comics, support by family, but how did you make that leap into becoming a professional cartoonist then?
Well,
So,
well, this is going to sound very like a child prodigy, but when I was 16, and so I was still at school. I didn't leave school till 18 years old. But when I was 16, we moved out from the centre of London to Sussex, and I approached one of the local regional newspapers about doing a comic strip for them.
yeah.
So I pitched them a couple of ideas, and they really liked it. And so my first professional work was my own newspaper comic strips, which ran for, I think in total ran for a couple of years or so. One was a science fiction science fiction horror thing that I wrote and drew. Inspired by this is inspired by the title of a Genesis song. Uh, Cul-de-sac was the name of the song. It's off their 1980 album Duke, if I remember rightly. And so this was this kind of science fiction horror thing that ran for about a year. And when that eventually ran its course, I pitched another idea to them, which was a science fiction comedy about a soldier in a space war who loses his head in a space battle, but both his body and his brain are kept alive, and they go through various adventures to get him a new head, a new organic head. I have no idea what my readers in like this little Sussex newspaper must have thought of this story, but it was, it was my first professional work, and I got paid very handsomely for it. I think I was earning, I can't remember what they paid me, but I'm sorry if there are any of the old editors from these papers listening into this, but I think I was being paid about £150 a week for it, which
Well, it is. Yeah,
it was pretty decent, for a single bar strip, typical newspaper strip. And this, I was still at school at the time, and so I was doing that before I applied to and got into art college in London, St Martin's College of Art, as was. I mean, it's still around, but in a very different form these days. And I did my foundation at St Martin's on the old Charing Cross Road, and eventually also did my degree course there. Went on to I got onto a 3-year graphic design course in the Covent Garden branch of St Martin's, and after a few months realized in no way whatsoever did I want to do graphic design. In fact, I loathed it with a vengeance. I really wanted to do cartooning and comic book work, but this was at a period St Martin's was going through a very snooty period when it came to sort of graphic arts and graphic narrative, and they very much looked down upon what I wanted to do, and so they discouraged me from following that path. There we go. There was a no. There was an early no. So they sort of said, "Oh, you should go into graphic design." And this was old school graphic design, pre-digital graphic design. And after about 7 or 8 months, I realized I hated it so much. And there were several other students who were kind of in the same train of thought as me. And so we got it again. This was very cheeky. We got the administration. We told them we no longer wanted to carry on with graphic design, and that we wanted to do like our own sort of film animation course, which didn't exist. There was a fine art film course in the basement of the building, but that was full of like young film students all dressed in black, which actually I'm all dressed in black today, so I shouldn't say. All dressed in black, going out with a black and white 8mm camera and filming a set of traffic lights for 24 hours. That was the kind of films they were making, but we wanted to do a more commercially minded filmmaking course. So it was very cheeky. We got them to set us up a brand new course for the last 2 years of my degree course. So
That's astonishing to be able to do that. Like, because you and I, we've both worked on the other side of the table in academia. Like, I suppose you couldn't do that today because it would be like with validations and all. Yeah,
absolutely. But well, I mean, obviously, it was a course within, but even so, I think in a way we were both lucky and unlucky, because this came about at a time when ILEA, the Inner London Education Authority, was being scrapped by the Tory government of the time. And the Tories were decimating art schools and forcing various art schools around London to amalgamate. And so I think St Martin's ended up amalgamating with Central School of Art. And so during our second and third year, we barely ever saw a tutor, because they were all off, trying to save their careers in this horrendous mishmash of like an admin nightmare that was going on around them, poor guys. So we just pretty much got on with what we wanted to do for 2 years. We went out and got our own clients. We brought in clients to make films for, and commercial films. My partner, I had a work partner at the time, a guy called Ben O'Goot, who's now a designer photographer in Switzerland, and we joined up together, and we got GEC, which was a big the General Electrics company, and they joined up with a Belgian company called Vanquier. I'm going to pronounce that very carefully, Vanquier. Um, so, and so we ended up making a film for them about fuse boxes. You know, when you go out on the streets and you see these like grey electric fuse boxes, they used to be made out of Bakelite. And it was Vanquier that invented Vanquier. It was Vanquier that invented Bakelite and or first used it in real commercial terms. And so they used to make these fuse boxes. So we made our first commercial work for a film going out to Belgium. You know, these two young students being invited to go out on location, filming around the streets of Ghent, fuse boxes. It was a really exciting film, as you can imagine. But yeah, so we just went off and did our own thing for 2 years, which was good and bad. You know, it taught us a lot of self-reliance, which is super important for anybody going into the creative industries. You know, you really need a lot of fortitude and self-reliance, and you know, go out and get your own work and stuff like that, and that has stood me in good stead over the many decades since the late 1980s that this was, and then out into the industry from art school.
It's really interesting. Like the story, it's fascinating because first of all, you're 16 and you're doing a newspaper strip, and we reprint the King feature strips, but we have like the artwork and all ready to go. We just keep the schedule, and we have digital means in doing it now. Like it's just an attached JPEG to convert to a PDF. For you to do it from scratch, like the frequency of that's an insane deadline to keep. Like you must have had several up in front, and then you are making the leap from illustration where you have total control over the strip because you're writing and drawing it, to now collaborating, but still the sequential storytelling of film is coming into play.
Absolutely.
It's such a multifaceted approach. Just to skip ahead, because we'll go back to the break into industry, but just skip ahead from your time as a teacher then as well. Like, were these the moments that kind of informed your approach then when you were on the other side of the table? Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, I think this is, I mean, it's something that I feel very, very strongly about, that teachers in the creative fields really need to have worked in the creative fields. Because, you know, for me, there was always, I mean, I taught full time for 10 years here in Norway. And, without naming names, there were several teachers that I experienced who had not worked very long in the creative fields and had mainly, you know, been teachers for their whole career. And this is going to sound like I'm knocking them. I guess I am. But I felt they were weaker teachers for not having worked in the creative fields themselves. And I'm sorry if this, I'm going to swear, but I'm sorry if this pisses anybody off listening to this who has not, any teachers who have not worked in the creative fields. But it's something I feel quite strongly about, because I think as a teacher in the creative fields, you're not just teaching sort of you know, methodology. You're not just saying this is how you draw, or this is how you write, or this is how you animate, or graphic design, or whatever. I feel the best teachers in the creative fields are the ones who bring in their experiences from the industry, from the real world, because I think that's also what you are beholden to teach students. Especially now, as we all know, it's a tough time for creative industries. You know, post-COVID, and you know, with the arrival of, here come those dreaded words, with the arrival of AI, You know, it's really tough times in all of the creative industries, and you have to fight hard to be able to make good living in the creative industries. And so I feel that a good teacher should bring their own experiences and impart that information, as well as the methodology of, you know, what tools to use and whatever else. For me, that stuff is as important, if not more so, than, you know, anybody can learn to draw or write or whatever. It's one of the things I always. I'm not totally anti AI. I'm not a
Mm-hmm.
luddite, but one of the arguments that people always use for AI is that it opens up the gateways to the creative services. You know, it takes away the gatekeepers of creativity, and I just feel that it's the worst bullshit phrase I've ever heard in my life. By all means, you know, if we want to talk about using AI as a tool, that's fantastic, but don't say they're gatekeepers to creativity, because it's just nonsense. You have create If you're lucky, you have creative skills. If you don't, you can learn them. It is possible to learn to be creative, coming at it from a different angle. I'm sorry, I've wandered way off the
No, no,
uh,
no,
question you asked me,
no.
but yeah, I mean, sorry, too long didn't read. To answer your question, yeah, I think these experiences are obviously are super important on the teaching side of things.
Oh yeah, no, everything there you were saying on the teaching side with the experience, like I don't know about you, but I never intended to become a teacher. That's something that
No,
presented
me either.
itself in the right. Yeah, and it's because the head of programs at Pulse College, Dave Williams at the time,
Yeah,
head of games and animation, he headhunted me from a Comic Con because he saw at the time we were doing like Sherlock Holmes, a few of the books, and he was
yeah,
like, I hadn't formally studied business. I went back and did more on it later, but he was like, "You understand what goes into put together this production pipeline to organize a team. So you had transferable skills. Come talk to game students who are very creative but have a difficulty in bridging that skill set." And
yeah,
I'll admit, in my time then, so I was like with them like yourself, probably over a decade.
yeah,
But I found myself transitioning into this other role, which is far more administrative. And I have to say that within comic books, just to take my main field, is a collaborative process. Like you typically have the
absolutely.
writer, illustrator, inker, so on. I think in
Yeah,
academia, you need that collaboration as well. And that sometimes people expect too much of, like, they see the lecturer, but they want them to act as an administrator on certain things
yeah,
as well. And I was like, have someone who's creative in industry but pair them with a very strong administrative team, and then
yeah,
you have a winning formula. I've seen places where they get industry experts, but they don't know about, how to process grading or how academic
absolutely.
integrity. So,
Yeah,
so it's a balance because, as you were saying, there are some teachers there who just they've no industry experience, but they're still very vital to
yeah,
the running.
absolutely, absolutely.
But you have to understand the roles. A lot of these places, and these are the institutions I'm talking to, and I'm sure you as
Yes,
well, like they need
yeah,
to recognize this more. They want to cram everything onto the shoulders and maybe a few
yeah,
select ones. Like, no, you gotta, if you want to build it, you need a solid foundation, and that's your team, that's
yeah,
your relevant industry experience, and that's your academic support. That's how you
yeah.
build it up. Uh,
150% agree with this. And I'm not going to go into, again, I'm not going to name names, but when I eventually left the place that I'd been working at after 10 years, I actually saw the job description of the position that I had vacated. And it was astonishing to read it, because what they were asking for everything from the
yeah,
new applicants. You know, you had to be a master in academia, a master in administration, and a master in having, you know, transferable skills from the industry and blah blah blah. And I looked at that and just thought, okay, well, good luck in finding that person, you know.
but this ties to your other point in AI because now with AI, so I've seen AI used prevalently within academia for the purposes of applying for grants or funding. So there
Yeah,
are experts who are like, if it's a copy and paste kind of cookie cutter formula, let's just use this to get our stuff
sure.
across, cut out the admin. practical elements. Within comics, we've had a couple of people on, and they've been saying how they've been using it maybe to prepare notes if they're doing something of a historical or scientific level, just to help in the research, but the creativity is still them. But the
Yeah,
point you were saying about gatekeeping, this is really interesting because some people are saying it's democratizing the access to artworks. Now, if you can't draw, you can still tell the story you want. But I'm like, no, hold on. Everyone can draw. There may be
yeah,
varying levels of
yeah,
like what you think in terms of stand up, but everyone can draw. And I have many students who are very anxious when it comes towards illustration because they may sign up for the course here at TASQ and be like, well, I'm primarily a writer, but we will encourage them, like, just scale it back to whatever it is. It could be simple shapes, it could be silhouettes, but try and find it because that's the journey you're going on. And it's not always about the
absolutely.
destination. It's it's the journey. Like otherwise you're just skipping to like
Yeah,
this.
absolutely. And this
Yeah.
this thing of democratizing art or democratizing creativity. I mean, I'm sorry, I'm going to swear again, but fuck democracy in this case. Why should art be democratized? I mean, do we democratize brain surgery? Oh well, you're a surgeon. You're a gatekeeper to surgery. Everybody should be allowed to perform brain surgery. No, you have to train and learn the skills and go, as you say, you have to go through a journey. And I feel the big problem with AI, it is taking away the opportunity for students to go on that journey whatever it is they're learning. Of course, AI is, it's undeniable. It's here. We can't close Pandora's box. We can't put it back in the box. It's here, and we're going to have to get used to using it. But it really should be used in ways that don't take away from the student's learning journey. It's super important they go, it's super important they make mistakes and understand their mistakes and realize what they've done wrong and learn from that process, and I worry that AI takes a lot of that away. I don't think it democratizes, it homogenizes. I can't hear you, mate. Sorry. Mike's gone.
Sorry, I put myself on mute there when I was coughing. No, so that's a great way of putting it as well. Like, and again, in terms of my academic experience, it's probably the same for you. Is a lot of institutions they have this goal where they were like, okay, even students when they sign up for a course, they want to know how to do one particular thing, and they think everything else is just extra, just add-ons for the sake of it. But it's like, no, it gives you a more rounded education to understand where you go into the pipeline. I refer to it as the T shape. Here's the full production, and where you will fit into it. But again, you want to kind of go on that journey, explore, and not become a copy of someone else. Because the risk is, I see this not so much in academia, but more so in industry where new software will be rolled out and they will just have like training programs. People sign up, do that, go into a job. They're very proficient on this particular program, but when the production ends, they've no transferable skills. So then
Yeah,
it's like, what do I do? And listening to you here now, a lot of it is self motivation and resilience, absolutely. But it's also you kind of you were producing work like from the comic strip to the films. You had an idea, and even like most students today, like they still like yourself at the film. Kind of, well, we want to do this. You organize and you kind of have an understanding and methodology and approach to why you're gonna undertake this and yeah, with AI, the concern is like kids, that what you described in your journey so far has been critical thinking. When I use that word, people are like, well, what does critical think? It's very academic. Like, no, it's literally evaluating what you need in a given moment and such and why. And if people become aligned on the AI, they think this is what I'm going to do, and they just
yeah,
become very cookie cutter and
yeah. Absolutely. As I say, homogenize. I mean, you only have to look at like one of the things I always say is if AI is such a great tool, and I'm thinking here particularly in animation, if it's such a great tool, for example, in animation, why have we seen no groundbreaking use of AI in animation? Whenever I see animation in AI, it's like it ends up looking like sub Pixar slop. that is so clearly, AI produced. Uh, of all the work in animation that I've seen that really heavily leans on AI, I can only think of one person off the top of my head that I've seen where I've kind of thought, okay, that's pretty creative work, and I'm not sure how you would have done it if you hadn't used AI. And it's a guy I follow him on, or at least I used to when I was on Twitter, and I refuse to refer to it by the other name. When I was on Twitter a lot, which I'm not anymore, he has an account called Nice Aunties, and he does these terrific AI pieces of work with all these like old Asian aunties, uh, which he does in the most creative way. I mean, he really he makes complete environments out of these old ladies, whole cities out of these old ladies, which is really something to see. I think it's called Nice Aunties. See if you can find it on Twitter or elsewhere. But I mean, that's one guy, and it's interesting that I can name one person after seeing so much AI work produced. And, I say this as somebody who may well be utilizing AI in a forthcoming project, which you sort of heard a bit about while we were in Malta,
Yeah.
an adult animated series, and we are currently looking at working with a studio in London that has a I can't really say anything about it because nothing
Understood.
is signed yet, but they have their own proprietary AI system, and it's a closed system, so it doesn't scrape the internet. It only uses what we feed into it. Um, and we are my producer, or the guy that my producer, and the guy that's created the series, Andy Frame, at this moment we are talking with this company and looking at a way that the production may end up using this incredible new process they use, and if we end up using that, it's going to be another huge learning curve for me and
Mhm.
the other director involved, because it will be a brand new way of directing. um, so I'm saying that because I don't want it to come across as like I'm some sort of luddite, completely anti-AI luddite. I have ethical concerns with it, and I have concerns over particularly how it's being used for students and in education.
Yeah.
But other than that, it's here, and I guess we have to figure out ethical ways of using it. You know.
And that's important. Like anyone who's listening to this, I might be thinking, well, I want to go on to study
Mm,
animation, illustration, comics, art of any form.
mm,
These are the type of questions now in the 21st century, making your school application you want to think about. It's like, does this college or university or institution have an AI policy? What is it? Will I be not taught on how to use it at all, or will I have some instruction? Consider the field you're going into. If the
yep,
tide is turning, and this is a tool at the end of the day, as you
absolutely.
put it, learn how to use it ethically. So there's many considerations, and like
Yep,
for academics and instructors, they have to think about it. One institution I teach for has an AI policy, and
right.
for it's for design students, but the policy essentially is for the written work. They can use it for grammar and syntax. And I just finished grading some papers, and I realized there were still grammar and syntax issues, even though they used AI and declared it and used the guidelines. But it comes
Yep,
down to the manner in which they use the prompt, you see. So if the prompt that they ask them isn't correct, the AI, it's not a foolproof system. So even if your goal is, well, it should be this, because students may go in there with an inflated sense of what the grade should be because they used AI. It's again, it's still not as open and shut. You have to be precise and you have to learn about these things. And it's important questions like being on polar ends of absolutely no AI or all AI is bad, or those kind of
yeah,
over reliance on AI. The extremes don't help, but that's where education, because sometimes people
yes,
question in the 21st century. why go to school, why study, but it's like formative feedback, transferable skills, and above all else, a social aspect as well,
Yeah,
getting to know people in an
yeah,
environment. Um, but yeah, and just to go back to your
yeah.
story, like where we left off, you were saying like you then left college, and where was the next step into the industry then? So you
Well, the
kind of
next step was a little bizarre because I came out. I actually, so my final training was to train as an editor. My last year, I trained in editing, and this was editing in the 1980s. So it was I learned to edit on with 35 and 16 millimeter film. So I learned to edit on like the big old flatbeds, the Steenbecks and everything, and came out into the industry in a really bad time, and there was no work around, and so I couldn't get any work in the film industry or TV industry. And so I fell back on my drawing skills and I got involved with designing designing cartoon boxer shorts, which which were huge in the 1980s, in the late 1980s. All the men's stores in the UK were full of cartoon print boxer shorts for men. And I made a very healthy living for a couple of years at least, designing fabrics for boxer shorts. And then I kept trying to break into the comic industry while I was doing this, and eventually got my first work. I'd been knocking on the door of London Editions magazines, who ironically were in Manchester, not London. And I got my first work for them lettering comic book pages. They would import Disney comic strips over and from Italy and publish them in the UK. And so they said to me, Dave, we like your stuff, but we have no projects, to pass on to you art wise. Have you ever done comic book lettering? And of course, I said, oh, yeah, I have. Zhup, makes Pinocchio nose noise. And I said, yeah, sure, I have. And so they gave me a bunch of strips to hand letter. And I went home and I bought, it might even be sitting here in my studio somewhere. I bought a book, How to Write and Draw Comic Strips. And I laid it open. I think it might have been by Alan Mackenzie. I'm not sure. That rings a bell. And I laid the book out on my drawing desk and I lettered for the first time ever. And I did that for a few months. I think I was paid the princely sum of about £7 a page or something like that. But then a project came along at London Editions. It was a Looney Tunes Bugs Bunny comic. And so they asked if I wanted to start drawing for that. And I did. I was sort of doing comic book work and still working in the fashion industry at the same time. I got asked by so in 1988 or 89, when the first Tim Burton Batman movie was coming out, I got asked by a clothing company. They were like, "Oh, Batman, you like all this shit, right?" And I was like, "Yeah, you could say that." And so they said, "Well, we've got the license for teen girl wear for this upcoming Batman movie." So they asked me to try out and do some artwork, and so I did, and it was all likenesses of Michael Keaton and Jack Nicholson as the Joker, and this stuff all had to get sent off to their agents in the US. And I don't know if anybody knows this, any of your listeners know this, but Jack Nicholson got his biggest ever film payday from that first Batman film. Not from the film itself, but because his agent was a very clever guy and signed a merchandise producing deal with him. And so Nicholson made a cut of all the merchandise, the Batman merchandise, from the first two Batman movies. Even though he wasn't in Batman Returns, he continued to make money from that. I can't remember what it was, untold millions that I can't remember, but he made it
like 50 million, I think, in
something
like
absurd
1980s,
like that. Yeah, and part of it was from my teenage girl dresses and t-shirts.
It's really interesting. Did you get any feedback from Nicholson's agent? Because Jerry Ordway, who did the who did the movie adaptation, kept
Yep.
getting notes back from Nicholson. He was very picky, and
Yep.
even up until recently, there's been no McFarlane tie of Nicholson because the
No.
likeness sign off, and they've kind of teased something. But how was that? Was the feedback from
Well,
the agents intense?
I know, John. So sorry, John, but I didn't get any notes on my Nicholson or Keaton artwork. Uh,
There you go.
I mean, maybe they were less worried about what was going to be on a teenage girl's dress than a comic book. I don't know. But anyway, this kind of Warner Brothers in the UK kind of were impressed with what I was doing, and so they asked me if I would join a thing that they were setting up called the Looney Tunes Design Looniversity. And so what this was, they were consolidating artists from around the world to become their approved Warner Brothers artists. And so there was about 18 or 20 of us from around the world, and we all got flown out to Paris for a week.
As you do.
And we were put up in these incredible hotels, and we would go into this park in the middle of Paris, to this old converted stables, and draw the Looney Tunes comic characters all day. And they brought in lots of the old directors from the classic 1950s Looney Tunes animation cartoons to teach us not just how to draw them, but also like the psychology of the characters. And so then I became an approved Warner Brothers artist for several years, and I worked on licensed material for Looney Tunes and Beetlejuice and the animated series, Batman, the animated series, things like this, producing licensed artwork for various different things. And then I had also broken into working with Marvel UK by this time, and this was in the late 1980s somewhere, where there was a lot of British creators were being headhunted by like DC and Marvel. Famously Alan Moore, to go and work on Swamp Thing and things like that, and then to create Watchmen, of course, Dave Gibbons and David Lloyd, and all these guys. But nobody was doing it in humor comics, which is kind of what I was working in. But then Warner Brothers in the US, they were in New York at the time, sort of working with DC Comics. They had this meeting at Marvel UK to specifically headhunt British creators. And so I got headhunted by Warner Brothers Worldwide Publishing and became a contract scriptwriter for them for 7 or 8 years, which brings us into the comic books that you found at the beginning. So I was writing for Looney Tunes, Tiny Toon Adventures, Animaniacs, Pinky and the Brain, Tasmania, the animated series, all of these kinds of shows. And so I worked with Warner's for, I think about 7 or 8 years as a contract scriptwriter. And that meant my stuff was being published all over the world then. I think Rizzoli in Italy were publishing a lot of the stuff, and obviously DC Comics. And so that kind of took me through my comic book years, really, until I then started to edge over moving into animation.
It's crazy though. All those initiatives are fantastic, and we could deal with them now. But it's a real shame in some regard because it feels as if in the internet age they're not as incentivized, as inclined to do it, because you can just reach out on LinkedIn, or you can
Yeah.
find someone's Instagram, and but
Yeah.
that kind of organization now, and the licensing wall, like I have some experience in, but it's so fragmented now trying
Yeah,
to
really.
yeah, it's just like divided up. It sounds like a golden age is actually describing to me, Dave. I'm jealous.
I mean, I get, I do think back on them as very fun, very creative, hard work as always, but very creative times. I went on to do Rugrats with Marvel UK. I was drawing for them, so this was my the twin sides of my creativity going on at once. Sort of, I was writing with Warner Brothers and drawing for Marvel UK. And so that was a real, and still at that point, hammering out a lot of fabric prints for the fashion industry, which I maybe oughtn't to say this live, but it was all, the rag trade back in those days, it was all cash in hand. So if you're listening to this, Mr. Taxman, I declared it all, honestly.
It's what's great about this is I teach fashion students and graphic
Right.
design, interior design. Yeah. So I teach like the business end in other institutions, but I'm going to recommend this episode to them to listen because they're in a multidisciplinary mixed group. So there's fashion students in with graphic design students in with interior design and architecture students. But I keep encouraging look across at your partner, see what they're doing, observe the processes because you don't know where the crossover might happen. Because you've just tied
Absolutely.
together, newspaper strips to comics to
It's
fashion
all,
to film.
I mean, it's all storytelling. I mean, I was asked about this recently because, and obviously now I've for many years I've worked in animation, and now I'm kind of crossing over into live action film as well. And somebody sort of said to me, "What's the connect? You've worked in so many different areas. What's the connection?" It's all storytelling. Maybe I should save this for the end, for the wrap up. But storytelling is we want to connect. That's what we do in storytelling. There's that really famous line. Many a true word said in jest, and that's true. Humor is looking at life through a different lens, through a particular lens. The lens of humor. But it's the same in all storytelling. All storytelling is about wanting some form of connection between the creative and the audience, which are often, they're the same kind of people. But you also want to reach out to you know the person on the street, for to use an awful phrase. But it's all about connection and about finding something true. I would take that phrase and actually say many a true word said in storytelling. It's as simple as that. That's what we look for. Something that reflects our lives in some way, or reflects truths that we look for in our lives, or gives us a different way of looking at something in our life. And genre storytelling, I mean, I'm not saying anything revelatory here at all. Genre storytelling does some of the best, many a true word stuff, science fiction and horror and, men in capes and boots and whatever. It's, the action and an adventure stuff. We want to be entertained, but we also want to see something that we connect with. And that goes right back to what I was saying at the beginning of the podcast about Peter Parker. I connected with Peter Parker as a character. I identified with his struggles with, relationships and family and work. And this was all stuff that really rang true to me. And then also it entertained me because he put on a spider costume and go and battle Dr. Octopus or the Green Goblin or whatever. And I think that's really what we look for. And that's also that's my red line that runs through my entire career is storytelling, whether it's fashion. You're still telling a story in fashion. It's a different kind of story, but and you do the same in graphic design and the same in, writing and comic books and filmmaking and animation. It's all storytelling, and it all boils down to the same things that we want from our stories.
Yeah, that's great, and it's amazing once you find a connection. As you're saying, the connection to storytelling, it is because like branded marketing is again just storytelling. So like
Absolutely.
I put an emphasis on entrepreneurial skills with all my students, mainly because once you're savvy enough to know to how to read a contract, what to sign, when to sign,
Yeah.
and balancing your books, once you have those skills, you get such an independence, but then you're
Yes.
more free to tell your story and to seek out and know what you want.
Absolutely. Yeah.
With
That's all super important stuff to learn.
Yeah, and it could be intimidating. Again, as someone who didn't, formally study business and then entered into the world of academia with business and set their own business as well.
Yeah.
Like I understand and appreciate all the intimidation factors
Sure.
that come with it, but
It's terrifying.
besides everything, that's it though. Like I think it's really important for people to hear. It's terrifying, but it's not impossible. That's what I would say,
And you will make mistakes, even if you study, this stuff. You will make mistakes, and again, from what we were talking about earlier, making these mistakes, which some at the time, seem horrendous, and that they're going to end the world. This is all part of the journey that we go on. I certainly have plenty of mistakes in my career. I'm sure to anybody listening to this, it all sounds like smooth sailing, and I can assure your listeners, that encapsulating this into, however many years it is. What are we talking about? Since, the early 1980s, 40 years? I don't know, something like that. It may sound smooth here, but it has not been smooth sailing at all. And I have made a very nice share of huge cock-ups along the path, Maybe we should do a separate talk sometime about great cock-ups I have made.
It's that we'll do a round table for that, get all the guests from the season back and just share war stories. Just to skip ahead in your animation career, because this is how we got to know each other. So I had been introduced. I think you had contacted Griffith College, where I'm an associate lecturer, and the head of the design faculty, Dave, had already put you in contact. So at the time, I was looking for an external examiner. For folks who aren't aware, when you study, to keep the system fair, it's not just like your lecturers or the institution that kind of gives you the grade. We have an external body, someone you have no prior experience with. So up until this point, you and I did not know each other, as you could probably tell, listening to this conversation very much in simpatico though about like what we look for in terms of academia grades and skills. And I remember during the early introduction conversations, you were saying that you had, might even be in your CV, done the music video for Batman Forever, which ironically was recorded in Windmill Lane Studios, where the college I was with at the time, Pulse College, that had spun out of it. So I was like such a small world.
The creative industries are a very small world. Really, it's all really connected.
Yeah, even more so now with social media and everything. It's like everything just spreads. But for yourself, what was that experience like? Moving like music videos, animation. Obviously, you had the sequential art skills, the visual narrative skills, and the editing skills. So, was there much of a learning curve making that transition?
It was absolutely. It was my first. It was my first music video as an co-art director, along with a guy called Dave Milgate. We were both art directors on this show. And it was a huge learning curve. I had not worked as an art director on a music video before, and not only was it a huge learning curve. I mean, if anybody out there listening knows the video, it's from the film Batman Forever, which had Val Kilmer as Batman, and Tommy Lee Jones as Two-Face, and Jim Carrey as the Riddler. And excuse me, my producer Andy had been asked by U2's management to sort of come up with this see if we could do this music video, and he had the part of the problem was that the time was very short from when he was first approached. It was due to be released. The song was due to be released on something like 6 or 7 weeks away from when he was first approached about it. And so Andy Frame, the producer, had sort of said, "Okay, well, we can maybe pull it off, but one of the big problems when you do animation with a band or with real people is that musicians are they have fragile egos like the rest of us. And so this comes to this back to this thing we were talking about Batman of approving likenesses and approving artwork and everything. And so Andy had kind of said, well, we think we can do this, but only one way. And that's if we give you some designs at the beginning and the band signs off on those, and that's kind of it, because otherwise we will not have time to make the thing if we're constantly going back on likeness approvals. So they agreed to this if the right kind of designs could be created. And so the guy that was doing the animation direction on it, Sean Mayer, he has a very, very specific art style. And so Andy had sort of asked him to come up with some designs for it. And it was just that his art style just wasn't right for this particular project. And he has quite an involved art style. And so Andy was kind of, well, we're not going to get this done in the time we have if we go with that. So he said to Sean, oh, do you can you think of anybody who might have a more kind of graphically minded comic book inspired art style? And so Sean sort of suggested me. And so Andy told me about this, and I didn't know this, what I'm about to tell you, until years later. And now I'm sort of dining out on this story because Andy had said, okay, well, Dave, if you can come up with some designs overnight and fax them to me tomorrow morning. This dates it. I faxed my designs to him. Faxes, kids, not the internet. So I faxed my designs over to him, and they got immediate approval. And so Andy always now tells this story that I saved the music video, which is very gracious of him. I do appreciate him saying that, and I have sent the check to his PO box for saying that. But anyway, so we had, I think by the time we started the music video, I think we had something like 5 weeks maybe in production. And I had never art directed a music video or co-art directed a music video before. And neither had Dave Milgate. So the two of us really kind of hit the ground running and very, very quickly had to figure out what was expected of us. And this is another thing in the creative industries. You frequently, like with the lettering, you say yes and then you do it and you figure it out as you're up and running. And the reason you can do that is because you've built up experience on other stuff, on your creative journey. You have the confidence to kind of say, okay, I'll sink or swim, and hopefully you will swim, but it's entirely possible you'll sink. And sometimes you have to take that chance, which I shouldn't tell. I certainly wasn't going to say that to the producer. Sorry, Andy, if you're listening to this. Anyway, we swam, and it was an incredible experience, incredibly intense, because this was all analog animation. So it was pre-digital, no CGI or anything involved. It was all traditional hand-drawn, traditional paint and trace animation. To the point where I actually remember there were several nights on the production where, when the animation cells had been painted, we would lay them all out across the floors of the studio, and I can't remember who it was, but some poor production person would spend the night going up and down the cells laid sort of face up with a hairdryer to dry them off, to get them to dry quicker, because our production time was so short. But we got it done in time. There was one last minute horrendous change that needed to be made. The you two were, I think they were co-owners of a band of a club in Dublin called Mr. Pussies, or Mr. Pussy or something, and it was named after a famous Dublin drag queen. Okay. And that we had included a facade of Mr. Pussies in the video with the band walking past the nightclub. And MTV just went, we cannot have Mr. Pussies in this video. And so somebody had to change. I think it was maybe the band's manager who had to get the artwork changed in this scene pretty much overnight, because it was booked to premiere on MTV on a certain date, live from New York. And so it went out on the air, and it was very successful. Hold Me, Thrill Me, Kiss Me, Kill Me is the name of the video. And we won a couple of MTV awards for it. And in 2016, Rolling Stone magazine named it as one of the top 20 best animated music videos of all time. Thank you very much. No check was in the post from them, unfortunately, but it was nice to be named in prestigious company. And so that really sort of saw my move into animation. From that, I began to work with Cartoon Network UK, and spent 10 years working with Cartoon Network UK. First of all, just as a cartoonist, and then eventually I moved into storyboarding with them, and working on all the sort of UK stuff for their shows like Johnny Bravo and Powerpuff Girls and Ed, Ed and Eddie, all that kind of Dexter's Laboratory, Cow and Chicken. I used to love drawing Cow and Chicken. And then Cartoon Network decided to make their Cartoon Network UK got into making their very first in-house produced animated series, which was this thing called V-Birds. Okay. And I eventually ended up directing there was one main little series of that, and then a kind of a dance offshoot series with the girls dance. It was all based on like PlayStation dance machines and stuff like that, which were very big in the early 2000s, with dance mats where you would dance on a mat in time to the stuff that was going on screen, and the characters were all kind of based around that kind of stuff. So that got me into directing, and that got me into animation pretty much full time.
It's the one thing that stands out to me, the story the most, is the idea of the sudden looming deadline. Say yes, and then you also that is 90% of the industry, folks. So anyone listening, it's like it's not for the faint of heart if you don't like deadlines.
No, it's very. I mean, and now it's even more increasingly so. It's common practice because people work with smaller budgets and smaller production time, and so deadlines just get more and more horrendous all the time, and budgets shrink. So that's something to look forward to, kids.
And to wrap us up, then, your latest project, you're working on a horror theme film. Is this correct? This is so. Anything you can say about that? I know it's in production at the moment, but is there much you can talk about?
Well, we're not in production yet. Yeah, I mean, I'm. So when I left, I went into full-time teaching for a while, an animation course in Norway. And when I eventually left after 10 years, I really felt that I needed to recharge my creative batteries after 10 years in education. And so I set up my own creative development company. Unfortunately, I did that just as we went into 2 years of lockdown with COVID. So my projects that I began to create really sort of just sat on the shelf for a couple of years. But since sort of 2022, I guess it is, things have started to move forward. So I'm actually juggling 3 main projects at the moment. There's the one which I told you about earlier, the adult animated series with Andy Frame, which we're hoping to go into production in January. And on that, I've done some script writing and script editing on that, and I will be a animation or director on the show. But for my own projects, I'm juggling two separate feature films. One is a family animated feature film where I've raised money to get the script written for that. So the script is written. We have a pitch deck for it. I won't say too much about it, but if you love kaiju and giant monsters, if anybody out there is listening with a spare €6 million, do contact me, care of Owen. I'll get, if anything comes of that pitch, I'll give him a cut in on this.
Folks, get the checkbooks out right now. Come on.
So that's kind of, I'm shopping that around at the moment to producers or production companies. And then the other one, I mean, this really is a weird thing because I think I use this phrase when describing it. The words I never honestly thought I would hear myself saying. Yes, I am developing a live action horror movie set in India and Norway. And that's bizarre. We have a lot of the creative behind the camera scenes is already on board. I think I can say this because we went public with it last year. I've been developing the story with a very well known Bollywood actor, Anurita Kajar. We talked about you mentioned earlier about how the internet and social media can play a role in making connections here, and this is exactly how Anurita and I connected. I'm a big fan of some of her work, particularly the breakthrough films that she made in Bollywood in India, which were a couple of Indian gangster movies called Gangs of Wasseypur Part 1 and Gangs of Wasseypur Part 2. Anybody who loves gangster movies, I thoroughly recommend these films. They're kind of they're not really like it, but the sort of Western equivalent I can think of would be kind of like if Quentin Tarantino had directed the Godfather films. They're these it's like this huge generational gangster saga. And she had a breakout role in these two movies, and I'm a big admirer of her work on these. And I just happened to come across her on Instagram one day. I thought, oh, right, okay, she's great. I love her work. And I contacted her. And we've become friends over a few years from this. And so we've talked about developing a couple of projects together. We have another one on the back burner at the moment because it's very expensive. But then we had this idea for this horror movie set, as I say, in both India and Norway, and we're now at the point I have a producer on board for that, and we have a probable director. I can't say any more about that because she hasn't signed on yet, but hopefully she will come on board. And so we are. In fact, we haven't even announced the title of the film publicly, but it will be announced very, very soon. We're preparing our first press release about the film, which I think is going to hit in India very soon, and then hopefully we can say more about it here in the West as well. But it's very exciting. It's a real, I haven't written any live action horror films before, and so here we are again. I'm at the age of 62. I am entering into completely virgin territory for me. I sometimes make posts about this film on my social media, and I hope that my complete bewilderment at being involved in this project and seeing it kind of coming to life I hope that bewilderment is quite, and bemusement. I'm very bemused by it, by the whole thing. How the hell did I end up doing this? But here we are. So I hope that bewilderment and bemusement comes across when I post about this stuff. I'm very excited about it, and about the animated feature as well. These are two real passion projects for me. I guess just very quickly, we should also say that's another important part of being a creative, is to feel passion, to be passionate about the work that you do and the things that you create. Having a passion for what you do sees you through many long days and nights and dark hours. But it does, it keeps you going. If you're passionate about what you do and you love what you do, it's as super important as learning transferable skills or whatever.
No,
so that brings us up to date, mate.
But it's excellent to hear this. The whole feedback into of beginning to end, but also the fact that you are still passionate, still looking forward, still excited to be involved. And as you said, you went away and you kind of took a moment to recharge. That's so important, because you spend so much of our time in isolation and running ourselves down. That recharge is amazing. If folks want to follow your journey, Dave, where are you online? Do you have any presence they can follow you? Or are you kind of
I'm terribly lazy with this kind of stuff. I really should have dedicated. I guess there's a Facebook page for Dave King Creative, which is my development company, which I update very infrequently, but it is on there, and I suspect, the problem with a lot of what I'm working on at the moment is it's stuff that I can't really talk about publicly. We're trying to set up deals and get money and bringing, actors and directors and blah, blah, blah. And that's not really interesting to put up for anybody, So I haven't been updating Dave King Creative an awful lot, but I suspect if these things go in the direction they look like they're going, I will update it more. I do have an Instagram, but which you're welcome to follow me on. I think it's Dave R. King, maybe. I think that's me. But you've got to be interested in vinyl records, because I spend most of my Instagram feed is me in the vinyl community, showing off Japanese city pop records and things like that. So, but by all means, you're welcome. It's a public page, so you're welcome. If you want to hear me talking, nonsense about Japanese city pop artists from the 1980s, do join me. And I'm sure I keep thinking that I probably should do a dedicated, Dave King Creative Instagram page. So maybe if you follow me on Dave R. King, I'll eventually mutate my stuff over to a dedicated creative page.
Brilliant. Well, listen, Dave, thank you so much for your time today, for sharing your stories. It's wonderful for people listening in, hearing like everyone's initial struggles or journey to how they start, and that it's always an evolving process. I think there's this misconception or myth of I'm not good enough or I'm not there yet. And like everyone feels that all throughout the career. It doesn't change.
Absolutely. And you know what, Owen? Honestly, I still feel that. I've been working professionally since like 1980 or something, and I'm an old dinosaur now, and I still feel, have I really made it? Am I, is this where whatever, am I? I guess it's imposter syndrome, part of it,
Yeah. No, listen, I think when we stop feeling that way, that's when I begin to get suspicious of like, what have I done wrong?
Well, I tell you what, sorry, I know we need to wrap this up, but it actually does speak to something that's very important with creatives. And it's that thing of not feeling too self-satisfied about your work.
Yeah.
I think this is super important. I don't think I ever look at anything I've done and sort of sit back and go, yep, that's perfect. That's it. Nailed it. I don't think I've ever done that. I think, I look at my work and think, okay, well, maybe that could have been a bit better, or I could have been done this a bit differently. And of course, all of that gets tied up with how much time you have and what the budget is on something. And so there's all these different things that are wrapped up in this. But I think the ability to look at yourself, to be self-critical about your work whilst not being, so self-critical that you run yourself down. I think healthy self-criticism is a very important quality to learn, but also to temper that, because there are people out there who would love to knock you off your pedestal, or whatever, and so there's enough people in the world who would do that. You don't need to do that yourself, but to have the ability to be self-critical and to keep learning. That's what I feel. I'm so many years in the industry, and I'm still learning. I'm about to learn a whole new set of I'm about to add a whole new set of tools to my creative toolbox in the next few years. So I think that's super important, is to keep moving on, keep learning, look back at your work, be happy with it, but be self-critical. I think these are very important things to learn.
Oh yeah, now Walt Disney, the actual Walt Disney, the person, had a great expression.
The Frozen one.
When we bring out a cryo freeze, but his expression was plussing. He would always look at something and go, can we plus it? Like, just add something else. He called it plussing. And no matter what he did, live action, theme parks, animation, he would always and that was that curiosity, that learning curve, and that was his unique expression.
Curiosity, that's absolutely that curiosity about your work and other people's work and the world around us. Curiosity is another. That was a really good thing to bring in. That's a super quality to have.
That's been brilliant. Thanks so much, Dave. And hopefully when everything's up and running with the other projects and you have more to talk about, we might hopefully get a follow-up interview in the future.
Absolutely. It's been a real pleasure. It's been really fun to talk with you, Owen.
My thanks again to Dave for joining me in today's episode of Creator in Conversation. It was great catching up with him again. It was a good crack over in Malta Comic Con as well. And as you can hear, Dave is just a great character. He's full of energy, brilliance, insight. Check out and keep an eye open for his upcoming projects that he was teasing. I'm sure they're going to be brilliant. And if you do catch Dave at a show, be sure to pop up and say hi to him as well. He's a totally enjoyable conversation. If this is your first time joining us here at Creator in Conversation, it's the official podcast of TASQ, TASQ, and if you follow us at taskart.com or at the handle at TASQ, you'll be able to learn more about what we do as Ireland's premier academy for sequential art and design and production, aka comic book production. I want to thank everyone, all of our previous guests, and you, the listeners, for joining us as we close out 2025. This is my first time doing a podcast of this duration, and it's been a wonderful experience. We're going to keep going for a few more episodes, and we'll wrap up season 1 at episode 52, which will take us to a full calendar year since we began this. So stay tuned, more to come. Till next time, this has been Copyright Production, Colley Consultancy 2021.